As many of you know, I'm a local history nerd. I love collecting old pictures of our area. I love hearing old stories. I love researching how our area has changed over the years. I started the Round the Bend Now and Then podcast to shine a light on the South Bend and Mishawaka area's history and how that has an impact on our present day lives. We're over 20 episodes in, and it's been a blast so far interviewing folks to help tell our area's stories. If you haven't listened yet, I highly encourage you to do so. It's on all of the popular podcast apps or on the website included in the notes in this video. The Round the Bend Now and Then podcast is audio only, but I wanted to branch out a bit and make something with a visual component, but with the exact same intent as the podcast, to teach folks about local history and what impact our past has on our present. So what a better first topic to pilot and try out than to tell the story of the beginnings of my neighborhood, Sunnymede. I am 45 years old, and I have lived in the Sunnymede neighborhood in South Bend, Indiana for 37 of those 45 years. I was born and raised in this neighborhood. Many lifelong cherished friendships were formed here and exist to this day. Heck, my wife grew up right around the block from me, right over the railroad tracks from our Longfellow Avenue home. Even though she'll tell you that I probably wasn't too nice to her, at least until we were in our early 20s. Needless to say, I have many memories that I hold near and dear to my heart that have been shaped in this neighborhood. So in this video, you'll learn how a neighborhood was shaped, told through varied historical maps, old South Bend Tribune articles, historical photos, and hopefully some engaging narration from this local history nerd. Please make sure to reach out and let me know your thoughts. You can reach out through the varied social media channels and email noted in the show notes and also on your screen right now. Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and also like, follow, share, and retweet any of my content that you think others would appreciate. I want to provide a bit of background knowledge of the area near where Sunnymede would eventually be built in the 1920s. This map is from 1875, and as you can see, it mentions something about Lowell, Indiana. According to the History Museum's website, the town of Lowell, Indiana was formed and covered that whole area there just east of the river. In 1867, South Bend annexed the town of Lowell, and this map was only 8 years later, so it's obviously still mentioned there. You can already see some familiar names: Wayne Street, Jefferson, Washington Street, etc. The bridge you see crossing the river is still there. Well, it's a different bridge now, but same spot. The former Grand Trunk train bridge is now a walking bridge in Howard Park. The railroad tracks you see were the Grand Trunk's main track until the 1920s, when the tracks that currently cut through Sunnymede were built. Many of our more seasoned but wise listeners remember these same tracks when they were a spur track between Sunnymede and Monroe Streets. Actually, the humps from those tracks are still there on Sunnyside and Twickenham. Sunnymede would eventually be built to the right of this map across Eddy Street, but at this time, in 1875, it was 50 years before Sunnymede was built, and it was just farmland. This, if you can believe it, is Jefferson Boulevard at Eddy Street looking east. The land in this picture was purchased by Jacob F. and John M. Studebaker in the 1870s. John built a mansion to the left of this picture, and other family members followed suit nearby. The estate was aptly named Sunnyside. And where the Sunnymede neighborhood would eventually be is to the right of this picture on the south side of Jefferson Boulevard. Most of this area was farmland called Sunnyside Farm. It's zooming in now on a building, and that's the Hereford Jersey Cattle Company on Jefferson Boulevard. This is the same building here, located right on Jefferson Boulevard, probably just west of the intersection of Sunnyside and Jefferson now. Here is a picture of the entrance to his mansion, and also a few other pics as well. Where Good Shepherd Montessori School is at now on Eddy and Jefferson Boulevard is near where the mansion and the land from the estate were. The mansion unfortunately was tore down in the 1950s, but the carriage house and a few other houses still stand. This map is from 1892, a few years after John and Jacob purchased Sunnyside Farms and built their lavish estates. You can see where it says fairgrounds. That was literally where the greenhouses and softball fields are at now at Potawatomi Park. The tracks going horizontal across the map are the exact same Grand Trunk tracks that I mentioned earlier. I thought that this map was cool because the track that the arrow points to never was created. In the early 1890s, a track was planned, and if built, would have cut diagonally through what is now Sunnymede. If that would have been built, who knows what effect that would have had on the creation of the neighborhood there. This is only 3 years later in an 1895 atlas that notes the same area. That is the current Green Lawn Avenue there, and you could see the fairgrounds as well. Again, that's where the softball diamond, greenhouses, swimming pool, Kids Kingdom are all at now. If you look above the fairgrounds, it says County Poor Farm, where the zoo is at now. The term poor farm was a catch-all term for folks who basically couldn't take care of themselves. Folks with all types of disabilities and also addiction stayed there. Get this. It was intentionally located on land between Penn and Portage Townships, between Mishawaka and South Bend, because it was far enough removed from both areas to be, quote, less affected by evil influences. It was there for 50 years, from 1857 to 1907, when the city deemed that the land was much more valuable for, say, a park. You could see all of that open land there, owned by Mary J. Studebaker. That was John Studebaker's wife. This is from the same 1895 atlas, and I highlighted the areas owned by the Studebakers, most of which is open land that still sat for 30 years after this 1895 map as farmland and undeveloped land. The green outlines Mishawaka Avenue at the bottom, Green Lawn to the right, Colfax at the top, and Eddy on the left. I want to stress that at this time, in the late 1800s, the area extending east from the river was thought of as more of a serene, natural setting. To paint a picture of the landscape in the area at the time, I want to share something that I found in my research. Many of us know that Farmers Market is on Beyer Avenue. It's that little street that curves right by the Farmers Market. That was named after August F. Beyer, who owned all of that land near there to grow his flowers and plants for his downtown florist shop. This 1892 article describes a boat ride down the St. Joe River and mentions his land. It mentions the best spring water and a half dozen fishing ponds. Other articles mention how serene and beautiful the area was. Beyer offered picnics and outings to his beautiful gardens. Imagine that. All of that beautiful, serene landscape, all right there where that darn clover leaf is at now. The house was actually still there until the 1960s, and it was a victim of the Cooper Street Bridge project that would have been located right near the cloverleaf. Again, I wanted to share this to help paint a picture of what the land around Sunnymede was like prior to its development. In this 1911 atlas, you can see that the area to the right notes Old Fairgrounds and is now called Potawatomi Park. I'd say that's when the fairgrounds moved to Springbrook Park, later named Playland Park. You can also see in this map that the area near where Sunnymede will be built is still undeveloped land owned by the Studebakers. And on this picture of the same map, I highlighted where Sunnyside Avenue would extend south, also where Twickenham would eventually be just a few short years later. Around the same time in the area near Studebaker's Sunnyside Farms was land being developed for housing, as this 1911 ad is marketing. I'd say that this is advertising the lots where the larger, beautiful homes are at now on Jefferson Boulevard. I love this part of the ad. away from the smoke and dirt of the city and on elevation, assuring perfect drainage and commanding view of the entire city and surrounding country. Think about that though. I mean, it's all city now 125 years later, but there was nothing in that area then, so you could probably see the countryside forever. I found a really cool road plan from 1924 made for the city of South Bend. It basically helps to set the master plan for our city's roads for the foreseeable future. Think of this. This is the early 1920s. Automobiles were in its early stages. The great majority of our city's roads were still dirt. There were still horses on the roads, right next to automobiles, right next to electric streetcars. Imagine having to plan the future of a city's roads during that time. Anyways, I wanted to share this particular map because you can see that the red dotted line going through the middle of that open land there, that is what will become Twickenham, originally called Harriet Street, or Klein Street south of the river, because the authors of the road plan knew that there were plans a brewing for a new neighborhood to be built in that undeveloped land there. I wanted to share this 1923 atlas because this would be the last one that notes an open, undeveloped area there because, again, plans were a brewing for a new neighborhood, a neighborhood that over the next few short years would alter the landscape of the once peaceful, serene Sunnyside farm. Here is one of the first articles from March of 1925 describing the new development going in on building high-class residence additions. Here's one of the earliest ads for the Sunnymede development, and let me tell you, the sheer amount of advertisements that Sunnymede's developers Leslie Whitcomb and Fred Keller purchased for the newspapers was mind-boggling. Full-page ads that in the first year literally was just selling folks on the vision. They were selling folks on the idea that this new neighborhood would be filled with nature, trees, curved streets, multiple parks, sewers, and lighting. Like this ad here. Quote, "Here in a beautiful forest of oaks, elms, walnut, hickory, and poplars, there is room enough for several large residences." That whole first year of 1925, the ads were just bragging and touting how much progress has been made on the constructions of the first phase of the neighborhood. Here are just a few more examples of the ad campaign as they were building the houses that first year in 1925. As you can see, it stresses things like the grading of the streets, building of the sidewalks, installation of gas lines, and so forth. But in the midst of all of this, they had a little issue dating back to 1853. There was a title dispute. There was a missing name to a single heir on a small parcel of land that they needed to clear up. It had something to do with J.M. Studebaker's impatience in wanting to have his house built. And it also had something to do with an error by the railroad company. It obviously got cleared up, but I thought that was a neat little roadblock there. But after that first year, a neighborhood was taking shape. This postcard shows the Wayne Street area near Eddy Street, which was an early phase of the Sunnymede development. In 1926, in the second year, Whitcomb and Keller were on a roll building homes around here. As this article states, they started building the second and third phases of the neighborhood. This is around the time that Longfellow, Chester, Belmont, Wall Street, Bronson, and South Street were being developed. In the ads from 1926, they were all boasting and bragging about the record pace of progress they were making and how many more homes they were going to be building that year. I love this quote here. Quote, "Where in April there was a vacant field there, arose within a few months as if by magic, one of the finest residential areas in the Middle West." I love this ad here. It's just letting you know that you are going to become very familiar with these street names. And a mere 52 years later in 1978, an infant Matthew Emery would be brought to his Longfellow home. And best believe he became quite familiar with those street names. This ad stands out to me as it describes the development near Mishawaka Avenue in Emerson. It describes the quote, point of junction of Wall and Chester, where one day was an open field and the next day was a park, landscaped with trees and shrubs. You see, that park right there on Wall Street in Chester, near and dear to my heart. We called it the Kinney Island, as all of us neighborhood boys used to pummel each other in epic, grueling football games. My wife also grew up right across the street from that island, and her folks, my in-laws, still live there to this day. Old Whitcomb and Keller kept up their braggadocious ways with this ad. 10 years of development in 18 months. Homes at the rate of one every 2.5 days. Sunnymede's developers, Whitcomb and Keller, were even official speakers at a real estate board conference to tout all of the successes from their new development. If you know who lives in this house now at 1332 Sunnymede, please share this with them. Their home was originally touted as the modern electric home. I wanted to share the next few pictures leading up to another cool ad that I found. One of the many charming characteristics of the neighborhood are the streetlights. Next, we'll talk about another charming aspect of our neighborhood, the train tracks. To add to the flurry of development around the neighborhood, at the same time that all of this was being constructed, a new railroad was being built, literally cutting diagonally through where the houses were already being built. Streets were already being laid out, utilities laid out. This article talks about the start of the project in 1926. It was part of a larger plan to elevate our city's tracks and make the roads safer. This new Grand Trunk track would replace the other track that I mentioned earlier. And like I said, that other track would hang on for several more decades as a spur track. This article talks about the actual groundbreaking for the new elevated railroad tracks, and the groundbreaking ceremony must have been near the tracks on Mishawaka Avenue. Speaking of the new elevated tracks to cut through the new neighborhood, I found out that early on in the neighborhood's life in 1927, there were already issues with the train tracks. This article from 1927 describes neighbors wanting an opening through the tracks at Sunnymede. I instantly knew that's an error there, because the tracks do not intersect at Sunnymede, they intersect at Sunnyside. But the neighbors wanted an opening at Sunnyside. We know that there currently is an opening there now, the Sunnyside Viaduct. Well, a second meeting was held, and the neighbors stressed that they needed a subway, that's a viaduct, at the new Sunnyside Street elevation. I'm thinking, yeah, there is a viaduct there. Where the red line is Sunnyside from Longfellow to Wall Street, or Emerson. But check this out. In the original plan of the neighborhood, Sunnyside stopped at Longfellow, and houses were planned where that section of Sunnyside is at now. And obviously, the railroad and the city listened because the Sunnyside Viaduct was built. Here it is in 1928, brand new. Please note that the South Bend Tribune incorrectly called this the Harriet Street, soon-to-be Twickenham Viaduct. Veteran Sunnymede residents would know that is definitely the Sunnyside Viaduct. Because this is a Twickenham Viaduct soon after it was built. This is a shot of the Grand Trunk Bridge over the river, as well as the Mishawaka Avenue Viaduct being built, with a streetcar underneath it. I knew that originally there was a school to serve the neighborhood called Sunnyside School. I knew that it was a small, temporary building before Jefferson was built, but I didn't know too much else about it. Turns out that from the get-go, it was clearly understood that this small, temporary Sunnyside School was way too overcrowded and something had to be done. Before I go any further, I want to share where the school was. Now, I could only find 2 addresses articulated, both on Sunnyside, both even numbers, and both very close in proximity. The first one was from a 1929 phone book that listed the school at 504 South Sunnyside. The next one is 512 Sunnyside, placing it right around here. Now, the houses weren't built yet there on Sunnyside, nor was Monroe Street, so I can conclude that Sunnyside School was somewhere in the area where Monroe intersects with Sunnyside now. The school was so crowded that they added 2 additional rooms and had to hire another teacher. And as it turns out, at that time, there were all types of competitions between schools for who kept care of their teeth the best. I mean, there were multiple articles in this area describing who won, who got second place, etc. Here are 2 picks from Sunnyside School who definitely valued their teeth. Last, since it is the holiday season, I wanted to share a very creepy picture of Santa Claus visiting the students at Sunnyside School. In 1929, plans were made for a much larger Sunnymede Elementary School. It was decided that the building would be named Jefferson School. Right away, there were even ads touting living close to the yet-to-be school. When I found this picture here, I got instant chills. I know it's blurry and I can't exactly tell what angle we're looking at, but it gave me chills because I went to Jefferson kindergarten through 6. Both my sons went there. I've driven or walked past or hung out around there literally thousands of times. It's always been this grand, big, beautiful building. And in my head, it just seems like it's always been there, a part of the landscape. But to see it under construction, it just got me. They named a new principal for the school, a gentleman who was serving at Sunnyside School, so they must have wanted that continuity to help serve the students of Sunnymede. They shared pictures of the new and modern school in the papers. That big room there they're calling the auditorium is what was called the all-purpose room when I was there, because the gym was not built yet. Here's an article describing the dedication ceremony. And what was born was one of the most beautiful schools in our entire area. But right away, the neighbors of Sunnymede couldn't tell time because the clock stopped working and had to be fixed. If you're wondering what happened to the old Sunnyside School, citizens could have purchased the portable school building. The neighborhood sorely needed an elementary school, and within a few years, by the late 1930s, plans were made for an East Side high school. The site was chosen on the corner of Mishawaka Avenue in Twickenham, and the land was sold to the school district by none other than Whitcomb and Keller. One of the reasons that it was decided upon Twickenham and Mishawaka Avenue is because of the Twickenham Viaduct. It provided safer travel to and from school. This high school was to be named John Adams High School, and it stood proudly after all of these years. Go Eagles. Over the next few minutes, I'll share a few stories that weren't so sunny. I mentioned earlier restrictions were placed upon who could live here. Sadly, in many of the advertisements was language advertising restrictions in the neighborhood. While this is something that I obviously think is horrible, it did happen and is part of our history, unfortunately. The St. Joe County Library recently had an exhibit describing the discriminatory red line practices that our city, like many others, had in effect to try to control who could live there. These are a few pictures from the exhibit that specifically mention Sunnymede. Author Gabrielle Robinson wrote a wonderful book called Better Homes of South Bend that goes into much more depth about the topic. I highly encourage you to check that out. You can also check out my interview with Gabrielle on the Round the Bend Now and Then podcast. Even 50 years before our neighborhood was built, there were some not so sunny things going on. One is this 1883 article talking about how somebody broke into Studebaker's Sunnyside Farms and let 2 horses out. Those horses were unfortunately hit by a Grand Trunk train and had their legs severed. Both horses had to be put out of their misery. In 1895, a horse got loose as a guy was coming home from the city. It kicked him in his mouth, broke his teeth, and shattered his arm. Even before the neighborhood was completed, as it was being built, tools were already being stolen, like in this 1926 article. My dad's 1978 Mustang was stolen on Longfellow Avenue in the early 80s. Even 50 years before that, in 1930, cars were getting stolen, like here at 1429 Sunnymede. A few years back, we had a bad wreck at Sunnyside and Longfellow with a car overturned. Check this car out at Sunnyside and Sunnymede in 1941. Quote, "Woman slightly hurt as car turns turtle." Then in the early 1950s was a train derailment just west of the Twickenham Viaduct. This picture shows onlookers in the backyard of a house on Longfellow. I'd say that that's one of the houses near the very end of the street near Twickenham. In 1946, there was some bus drama in the neighborhood. Now, this was early on and right after the city did away with streetcars and instituted the buses. This is classic Sunnymede. It looks like some of the Sunnymede neighbors petitioned to get the bus routes through the neighborhood. Then, they didn't really use those bus routes, so the bus discontinued it. Then the neighbors got upset at that. That is just so Sunnymede. I really hope that you enjoyed learning about the beginnings of my favorite South Bend neighborhood, Sunnymede. Sunnymede now, 100 years later, is considered close to the center of the city and not on the outskirts. It's not as full of high-class residences as it originally was touted. And best believe, we welcome all races, genders, preferences, etc. And those restrictions are illegal and a thing of the past. I hope my first go-around sharing a video story from our area's past was successful. I want to thank the History Museum and the Studebaker Museum for many of those photos throughout. A credit to the South Bend Tribune Archives on newspaper.com for a lot of the research. Again, please be sure to like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Please be sure to share any of our content and reach out with any feedback.